Hey guys, it is Wingy here and welcome to a slightly new series, as in it's something that I have done before, but done differently. Not really done differently, it's just sort of about a different thing. Anyway, so for those of you who watch my channel, you will know that I have been doing a ranking Doctor Who series where I have ranked various different things regarding Doctor Who. And I thought, well, the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is big enough now that maybe I can start ranking that. Obviously with this whole lockdown stuff and not being able to go any fucking where that you want to go. Been rewatching the Marvel movies and I've got to say, they're top. They are really, really good. Not all of them are though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each phase of the MCU and I'm going to rank each of those movies in order of preference, or just worst to best, least favourite to favourite. You kind of get how it works. So phase one, of course, is the original phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting all the way back in 2008 with the first movie Iron Man, going all the way up to the very first team-up movie, Avengers Assemble, or just the Avengers, whatever you want to call it. I have a lot of nostalgia for the original phase one movies. I imagine a lot of people watching this have a lot of nostalgia for them as well, but let's get into it. So my least favourite movie of phase one has easily got to be The Incredible Hulk. See, the thing is with The Incredible Hulk, I get that people say it's underrated, I get that people find that it's an underappreciated movie. However, for me, the movie is fine. There isn't necessarily a standout glaring issue with The Incredible Hulk. It's just, for me, I find it boring, I find it dull, and whilst I'm watching it, yeah, it is totally fine. When I'm not watching it, I just couldn't give two shits about it. The funny thing is as well with The Incredible Hulk, considering the amount of movies that Marvel have made, like, it's a shit ton at this point. It's like, what, 22, 23, something like that? The Incredible Hulk has got to be the only movie in the entire MCU that if you do not watch it, it will make no fucking difference really whatsoever to the entirety of the MCU. There are certain movies that you could argue are key movies in the entire franchise. Like, if you miss out on that, you are going to lose out on other information further down the line. So for example, Doctor Strange, let's take that as a movie. By itself, yeah, it's a really good movie. However, in the context of the MCU, it introduces stuff like the Time Stone, which is obviously going to lead into Infinity War and the Infinity Stones and all that sort of stuff. So, Doctor Strange is a key part of the MCU. With The Incredible Hulk, all you get is essentially the introduction to the Hulk, which we don't really need to see. A lot of the stuff that's in this movie makes no fucking difference really to the grander scheme of the MCU. In fact, when we see the Hulk again, he's played by somebody totally different anyway. The only thing really that is consistent from this movie is the reappearance of General Ross. And even without the Incredible Hulk movie, he could just show up in Civil War and it would make not a blind bit of difference. Like I say, the movie itself is okay when you're watching it, but apart from that, it's just really dull and forgettable. Speaking of dull and forgettable movies, let's talk about the first Thor. I think Thor is an awesome character. He really is. From the comic books to the actual live action movies as of late, Thor is a really awesome Avenger. However, people seem to forget that his origins in the movies are not that great. I mean, a lot of people rip on Thor the Dark World, but having got up to that in the watch along, well, not watch along, but rewatch that we're doing, Thor the Dark World I think is actually better than the original Thor. I like what this movie is doing. I like the idea that Thor is this cocky, arrogant arsehole that needs to be taught a lesson, and he can't be Thor. He has to learn the hard way about being a king and leadership. And I like the whole idea of him losing his powers and being banished to Earth. That's fine. It's just everything else with this movie, I just don't engage with it. I don't engage with the supporting cast, apart from Loki and Odin. They're sort of the only ones that I do genuinely like. Like, whether it's Selvig, whether it's Jane Foster, whether it's Darcy, who's fucking annoying. None of these characters have any sort of impact on me whatsoever. The actual story of Thor is more interesting than the execution of this film, if that makes sense. If someone told me this film and described how it went, I'd be like, oh, that sounds interesting. However, watching it, it isn't. The action in this movie isn't 100% great either. There is some decent scenes, don't get me wrong. I think the stuff with the Destroyer is pretty cool. I like the whole stuff with Thor where he's sort of whipping up the tornado and he strikes the Destroyer, and that's really cool. But there's other stuff in this movie that, even though there's stuff happening, I just don't care about it. Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth are phenomenal in their respective roles as Loki and Thor. Odin played by Anthony Hopkins as well, is fantastic. That's the only truly great things about this movie for me. In fact, with this movie, I would say only watch it just because it makes the Avengers make more sense. But even then, there's some inconsistencies between this film and Avengers Assemble. Coming in third place, fourth place, the third least good. Gonna go with Iron Man 2. Now, Iron Man 2 is not a terrible movie, and I think this is the film that probably gets a bad reputation more than what it should. In fact, the entire Iron Man trilogy I don't think is as bad as people make it out to be. Obviously, a lot of people love the first one, and rightly so, it's awesome. But this one is actually a decent movie as well. The problem that I have with it though is it's not as interesting or as engaging as the other two Iron Man movies. At least when it comes to the first Iron Man, you've got a real strong character-driven story there. Even the stuff with Jeff Bridges, it might not be the best, however, it's still serviceable enough. With this, Mickey Rourke's character, who he's Whiplash, he just doesn't really feel like a genuine threat. He's just sort of there in the background. The Justin Hammer character, he feels more like the proper villain of this movie, and yet even then, he's not that great either. He's just sort of a business rival. Robert Downey Jr. is great, and I love him as Iron Man in this, and I love that whole new dynamic of, okay, so he found the cure of how to build like an arc reactor so that will keep the shrapnel out of his chest. But what if the way that he built it isn't right, so now that's killing him? I like that story aspect of it. It could have been done slightly better though. I feel like it sort of appears and pops up when the story needs something to happen rather than it feel natural to the plot. The action in this I think is great. I think the only issue that I have, especially with the final fight, is a lot of the time it feels like it's just there, then it's over. It doesn't really feel like there's momentum to the action. It just sort of feels bam, 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 done. The only truly great fight scene in this movie that I can think of is the Grand Prix in Monaco. I mean, where he suits up, where he's got the suitcase, that's fucking sick. And even where he's like whipping the cars and they're blowing up and flying everywhere, that's awesome as well. I do like the end fight, however, like I said, it just feels a bit rushed because it's like, okay, we're gonna fight all these drones, and then he just has one thing that beats them all anyway. So that's sort of over pretty quickly. And then Whiplash arrives. They must fight for less than a minute, something like that. He's just there and gone instantly. I like seeing War Machine suit up for the first time. That's awesome. And then obviously it's the first appearance of Don Cheadle as opposed to Terrence Howard in the role. But he's obviously a lot better. You can tell that the chemistry between him and Robert Downey Jr. is better. But overall, it's meh. It's just a meh film. So the next one I'm going to talk about then is the first Captain America. Captain America, the First Avenger. I massively underrated this film, massively, and I think for me, hands down, in terms of a trilogy outside of the Avengers, Cap's got the best trilogy. Without a doubt, the Captain America trilogy is the best. And the thing is, this is the worst one out of the three for me, yet it's still really good. I like seeing the transformation from him as this little guy into the big Captain America, and pardon the pun, he earns his stripes in this movie. Like, he has got such a heart of gold. He is such a humble character, and I just love Steve Rogers. He is such a lovable character. You just know that this guy would literally do fucking anything because it was the right thing to do. He would sacrifice himself if it was the right thing to do. And this is a constant throughout the MCU, not just this movie, but it's highlighted especially in this one as we're getting to know him. I love the war aesthetic as well. I'm a big fan of the 40s aesthetic, you know, with the suits and the way that they're dressed, and as well as the sort of Art Deco style technology. That stuff I love. So seeing that in a superhero movie is fucking awesome. The villain, I think, is handled decently well. I think so far in the MCU, before the Avengers, this was probably the best that they handled the villain. And of course it's the Red Skull, who is a very iconic Marvel villain, especially for Captain America. Hugo Weaving does a very decent job. You can tell that he doesn't massively love the part, but at the same time, with all that makeup on, do you blame him? Then again, you are getting paid for it, so tough shit really. I love seeing the war effort as well. I love seeing how Cap goes from this soldier with a heart of gold who can't really do much to this absolute powerhouse that is like saving a whole battalion of dudes and is bringing them back and all this sort of stuff. It's great. My only major gripe is, again, the action is somewhat lackluster. I think the best scene in the movie, annoyingly, is a montage. You know, where they're just busting down doors and shooting guns and he's throwing a shield and whatnot. I mean, that shield just doesn't obey physics, which is amazing. But it is what it is. You know, the action in this movie is still great. It comes at you very quickly. There's not many moments where we can sort of sit down and digest everything. And I like that about this film. I like the fast-paced nature of it. I also love how tragic it is as well, because at the end Captain America has to sacrifice himself, because of course that's what Captain America would do, and then he wakes up in the modern age, and if anything that is arguably a fate worse than death, because everything that you knew, both in terms of your personal life and just your day-to-day life, no longer exists anymore, and you've got to learn a brand new way of living with no one in the world that knows who you are, or if they do, they're incredibly old and probably aren't long for this world. I mean, the stuff on the train as well was awesome. I remember watching that for the first time and thinking, oh shit, Bucky's dead. Little did I know. Can I just say as well, the suit is fucking awesome. The first Captain America suit is amazing. We're going to talk about the Avengers in a bit, and Captain America's suit is definitely the worst thing about that film. They got it so right in this film. How did they fuck it up? So there's 2 more films left, and I'm going to say Iron Man. I'm going to go with Iron Man next. It's the movie that started it all. The movie that began the MCU. If this movie didn't work, we wouldn't have Avengers Endgame. We wouldn't have any Avengers film, probably. Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man, right from the fucking get-go. This dude is awesome. He is, without shadow of a doubt, my favourite Avenger in terms of the movie universe. He's a badass, he's witty, he's funny, he's an absolute genius. He's also a bit of a dick, but in a nice way. He's that sort of lovable dickhead that you don't want to like him, but you can't help it. And again, it's that lesson that he learns. Similar to the story that Thor went through, I think Iron Man takes that exact same thing and handles it a lot better, because it feels more natural. I mean, getting kidnapped by terrorists is not totally natural, but the journey that he goes on is more so. I mean, Tony is someone who doesn't care about consequences. He really doesn't give a shit. He's just like, yeah, whatever, you know, I'm incredibly smart. I have a shit ton of money. I can get any woman I want. I don't give a fuck. But when that backfires and his own weapon is the reason why he ends up getting kidnapped, then shit, yeah. Maybe he has to assess his life. And that realization when he's in the cave of he's just like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. You know, I was supposed to be doing something good and I'm not. The exact weapons that I am making to protect my people, or the people in my country and the people around me, are being used against them, and I can't stand for that, so I need to do something else. It's that resilience of Tony Stark, I think. The idea that he's always got to keep trying and keep doing something different until he gets it right. You see it in this first movie, and that's one of the main character traits about Tony that I absolutely love. That and his humour, obviously, because he is a very witty character. And it's not just a simple case of, like with a lot of superheroes, they sort of just become the superhero. With Tony, you see him tinker. You see him with the original suit in the cave, then he builds a new model and he's testing out like the software and stuff, then he completes that suit, and then he gets another one and repaints it and all that sort of stuff. I like seeing the development of Iron Man. I love seeing how he goes from Tony Stark to Iron Man, but really they are one and the same. You don't have one without the other. And unlike the Thor movies, the supporting cast are fantastic. Whether it is Pepper Potts, whether it is Happy, whether it is Obadiah Stane, that's his name, right? Jeff Bridges' character. These supporting characters I love. They're really engaging. They're fantastic characters. You know, the way that Tony realises that Pepper should be a lot more to him than what she actually is brilliant, because you're rooting for it. If you're gonna have to have romance in movies, which I'm never a massive fan of, especially in like action superhero movies, then do it like this. Do it in a way where you genuinely care about that relationship. You care about the two characters. You can feel that with Pepper and Tony. The villain, again, is not a stellar villain. However, it's still perfectly serviceable, and considering it was the first movie and they were testing the waters, I think this movie is fantastic. Iron Man looks awesome, and it is awesome. But it's not the Avengers, because of course Avengers Assemble has got to be #1. The hype for this film, fucking hell. I remember the trailers dropping, and I had to see them. I was so excited because for me, as someone who grew up with the comic books, as someone who was reading about these characters for years and saw these different characters team up on the page, but it had never, and in cartoons of course, but on the big screen it had never happened. You know, you had the Spider-Man movies, you had the X-Men movies, the Fantastic Four movies, and that was about it. Well, I mean, there was a few more like, but you never really saw them cross over with one another. It was always like, right, okay, this is your X-Men movie, this is your Spider-Man movie, this is your Fantastic Four movie, this is your Blade movie, and that's it. But what if that wasn't the case anymore? What if Iron Man could be in the same universe as Captain America and Thor and Hulk and Black Widow and Hawkeye, and then they'll team up and they'll fight a massive fucking army, and then later on characters like Doctor Strange and Black Panther and Spider-Man will come into it, and then they'll all team up, and then the fucking Guardians of the Galaxy, who no one had fucking heard of, had joined it. But you know, this is where it spawned from. It spawned from the Avengers. If none of phase 1 worked, we wouldn't have the Avengers, and thankfully the Avengers worked just as well. I was asked not long ago what my favourite movie was out of the MCU, and I think it is the Avengers. I don't think it's the best movie, definitely not, but it is my favourite one because of what it represents, both for me as a fan and for the entire MCU as a whole. If this movie did not work, I mean, I know I said that about Iron Man, but this one more so, because if the team up doesn't work and people don't want to see it, then you're fucked. This had to work, and it did. You brought together these big characters, these big personalities. You made sure that they had enough screen time, that they did stuff. They all have their big moments throughout the film. They all have their big action set piece. They all team up and work together. Joss Whedon directed this movie and did an incredible job with how it looks. I believe he wrote it as well, and he gets every single character bang on. I mean, some of the stuff story-wise doesn't totally work. Like I mentioned before, there's certain stuff from Thor that doesn't quite work, like how come the Bifrost now works. Loki is a phenomenal villain, and Tom Hiddleston puts in an even better performance than he put in Thor. This is full-on dickhead, likeable Loki, the villain that you hate to love. This is the reason why so many people fell in love with Loki. It wasn't because of Thor, it was because of this film. It's the charming nature of Tom Hiddleston's performance that really sells it for me, because he's doing these awful things, he's doing these horrible things, like the bit where he goes to that party and he just gouges that guy's eye out so he can scan it for a rectal code or whatever it was. And he's there doing it with a smile on his face. He even has banterous moments with the heroes as well, which is awesome. Every character shines in this movie, every character gets their moment, every character gets to do something that makes them look awesome. Apart from Captain America, because he looks fucking shit throughout this entire film. I mean, I mentioned it before, but what were they thinking with the Avengers suit for Captain America? It looks like plastic. It looks awful. Thank God that later on he just got better suits, because this one is awful. This movie is fun, this movie has great action, it's written well apart from a couple of plot holes, the characterizations are fantastic, and the interactions with all these different characters are brilliant. Not only that, it sets the seeds for multiple movies in the future. You can sense that tension already between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, which would obviously later go on and properly blow up in the MCU's face. The relationship between Thor and Loki is tested in this film. The Hulk really comes into his own in this film as well. Like, Ed Norton and his performance is okay, but let's be fair, Mark Ruffalo is 100 times better. We all would rather have seen, I mean, this is with hindsight of course, but would anyone really want to go back to the start of the MCU and redo it all, but with Mark Ruffalo taken out and Ed Norton put in instead? I don't think so. And I like Ed Norton as an actor, but Mark Ruffalo is just brilliant. Even the little teaser Thanos at the end as well. This movie's sick. I mean, the first half hour is a bit dull, but after that, when it really starts getting going, awesome. And that is my ranking of the first phase of the MCU. In the comments below though, guys, let me know, what do you think? Do you agree? How would you rank phase 1 of the MCU? If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it, subscribe for more. Social media and Patreon links will be in the description below as always, so if you'd follow me on any of those things, I'd absolutely love you forever. But till next time guys, you take care of yourselves. Goodbye.